Years ago, when my friend and Jerry's wife, Kitty Rhodes, was ill with cancer, Jerry was out of state on location, and she called me and asked me to bring Elizabeth and Katie home. I had been babysitting while she had gone to the doctor's for a doctor appointment. So I took the kids home, and when I got there, Kitty and Bobby were packing the car, and she said that she had gotten some bad news at the doctor's appointment, and she wasn't comfortable giving it to Jerry over the telephone, so she was going to drive with the kids and get there that night. I asked her what I could do. I offered to keep the kids, and she said no. She wanted to go as a family, and she said what I could do was pray with her. So since I didn't know how much the kids knew at that point, I knew the girls didn't know anything, we just prayed for a safe journey. So we held hands there in the car, and we all prayed together for a safe journey. That whole night, I kept praying that Kitty and the kids were going to get there. And I didn't know what to pray. It was really difficult for me because I was grieving. My friend had gotten very bad news. She had those 3 little kids, and she was driving out to another state, knowing in her state of mind that she'd gotten bad news. It just really, I just felt like I wasn't able to provide what I felt she needed. So I started talking to Sharon Rhodes Wickett, who was our pastor at that time, about how incompetent I felt when Kitty asked me to pray with her. She said that she and Al were forming a class called Caring Ministries that was going to prepare congregation members to care for other congregation members in crisis. I joined, one, because of that situation, also because I wasn't comfortable praying out loud, except for grace before meals. And in that class, we learned so much more than how to pray. We learned to listen, we learned to just be there, and we learned to pray. Not just with the team, but later alone when we were away from the person requesting prayers. We learned to keep that prayer at the top of our own prayer list and continue to keep that prayer going. A spiritual connection was made for me at that time. When we changed pastors and Preston Price came, he added the aspect of prayer teams and healing advocates. And that's been a spiritual blessing for me as well. I was able to be with friends from this church who were ill, hospitalized, or in crisis, and I was also able to share in joyful times. We participated in supporting the Pecks as they prepared to adopt Michael, and that was a really joyful time. We were also there for Roy and Sarah Pat as they lost a baby and then were blessed with twins. The impact of Caring Ministries on my life must have been more evident than I thought, because one of my supervisors down at CSUN, when I was going to school down there, called me when she was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. She asked if a team of healing advocates from our church would meet with her. Now, I don't know if I mentioned that Joni was Jewish. Ann Berkebile and I agreed to be on Joni's team, and we went down and we met with her once a week. Her husband, Bob, began coming in and praying with us. Joni told me that they had never, in all their years of marriage, prayed together before. When Joni died and Ann and I were heading to her funeral, I shared with Ann that I felt like I had let Joni down. I felt like she called on us because our title was Healing Advocates, and she felt that we would be able to help her heal. And Ann said, "Oh no, that's not true." You know, Ann was a cancer survivor, and it was a great partnership for us to be going down there because she had cancer and she understood some of the stuff Joni was going through. And so there were times when she and Joni would just talk in the bedroom, and I would go out and be with Bob and the kids and spend some time with them talking about how her illness was affecting their lives. And Ann said in one of her talks with Joni, she said she called us because she wanted to be ready to die, and she wanted Bob to be ready to let go. She'd talk with Joni that Sunday while I was talking with Bob and their kids. And Joni had recognized that the spirit that we were learning to allow into our lives was what she needed. And I know it's something my family needed then and something that we continue to need now. So I thank Santa Clarita United Methodist Church for the opportunities that we have had, not only to care for this church, but for this church to care for us.
Good morning. I'm back. Matthew and I were speaking this weekend. I told him that I was going to speak again this weekend at church, and he asked me, well, is that just because you can't say no, or is it because you were actually good the last time? I'd like to believe that's because my message got across and I was good. Melissa assures me that's it, that if I wasn't, she wouldn't have asked again. But the last time I was up here, I talked to you about being present with the spirit of this church when you left on Sundays, and suggested that participating Monday through Saturday activities would help you to keep the spirit of this church in your heart. But how do you participate Monday through Saturday? Well, I think Juliana and Marianne and Ron have all talked a little bit about small groups and how you can participate in the small, sorry, I just heard Rebecca scream, so lost focus. The small groups can help you carry the spirit of this church when you leave. I had said in the first service that because I'm an appellate lawyer, I like to do things with lists and in threes, but Matthew also suggested that maybe that's just the Methodist in me. So small groups keep us connected in three ways. They keep us connected to our church, connected to one another, and connected to God. Now, first and probably the most obvious is the connection that small groups foster with our church. You're probably here on campus for a meeting or a lesson or event. And the more that you're present on this campus, the more familiar you become. The more familiar you become, the more willing you are to come back. And while you're here, participating in those small groups, you're probably working to further the mission of this church, which, just for everybody, it's printed on the front of your bulletin. Because we choose to follow Jesus Christ, we gather together as a family to nurture and empower each other so we can go into the community as the love of God. Now, if you're a member of the Helping Hands, you're actually working on physical improvements of this church, and so there's the connection. You may be part of a various leadership committee, the finance committee, staff parish, any of those leadership committees, board of trustees, and of course, that's going to strengthen that connection that you have to this actual church. I know that for me, being here with members of my church, whether it's for a Mommy and Me play date, or a children ministries event, or rally day, or family picnic, my physical presence here connects me to this place. And the familiarity that I have, having been here the last couple years as we renewed our faith and came here with our family, has made me even more comfortable and has turned this into a second home for us. The second connection that small groups foster is our connection with one another. Through the more intimate contacts of the small group, we develop deeper friendship, reveal vulnerabilities, and create significant investments in each other's journey. One person's struggle becomes all of our fight, and one person's triumph becomes all of our joys. I can't cure cancer, and I can't erase hate, but I know that through my connections in my small groups, that my prayers are joined with other people's, and that together we can lift up the people who are fighting so hard, and we can give love to the people who need it and whose hearts need healing so that they can erase the hate. Our iFamilies have been through some very frustrating times in the last 2 years since we were formed. And we're together in prayer, in quiet moments, on Facebook. Whether the assistance is a meal, some advice, a shoulder to cry on, we're there for each other. In fact, Nicholas just started a family support group. So if you're in trouble or your family's in crisis and you need a meal or you need someone to pick up your kids, you have a resource. We also have a prayer group on Facebook called Pond Scum. And you can go on there in the middle of your day and just say, hey, my secretary's, going through a personal crisis, please lift her up. I've done it on more than one occasion. But we have fun too. That's what fellowship's for. Just last weekend, 5 couples from the iFamilies got all dressed up, put on our best Saturday night dresses, our high heels, and our lipstick, and we traveled down to the Magic Castle for a night of fellowship and magic. And I have to say, we clean up very nicely. There's pictures on Facebook to prove it. But IFAM is only one of the many small groups that fosters these kind of connections. And I encourage you, actually I was talking to Marcia Gilpin on the way out after first service, and she said, IFAM sounds a lot like Genesis. And I think that when we first started IFAM, that was kind of the theory, was that we would be our generation's Genesis. Those families have grown up together, their kids have grown up together and have lifelong bonds that were built on the basis of these church family friendships. So, and finally, and probably most significantly, well, certainly most significantly, the small groups keep us connected to God by focusing our intentions on God. Whether it's the Wesleyan Spiritual Group, or an ongoing Bible study, or a holiday-specific Advent study, our focus becomes this connection with God. I've yet to participate in a Bible study. As you can hear, my child has high needs. I haven't been able to go away for a weekend on a women's retreat, but I'm excited for the day that Rebecca is a little more self-sufficient, and I will be able to participate in that study and that fellowship. But I can attest to the fact that fellowship group can offer these connections too. In fellowship, we're more connected to God because we're connected to our church and to each other. It comes back to our mission statement. Because we choose to follow Jesus Christ, we gather together as a family to nurture and empower each other so that we can go into the community that is the love of God, as the love of God. So again, I'm on my soapbox, quite literally. I encourage you to find a small group and foster those connections, because the love that you'll find will fill your heart forever.
Growing up in this church, I have been a part of many different groups and activities. From Sunday school to Camp Kobe to MYF to choir and bell choir, this church has often been at the center of my social life. When the Rainbow Ringers formed, I immediately joined and formed long-lasting friendships as a result. Tuesday nights, I got to completely forget about my responsibilities and homework and spend an hour talking to my friends. Oh yeah, and also playing some music. During my first year of college at Cal Lutheran, there were many times that I was almost convinced I could definitely drive back from Thousand Oaks to go to Bell's on Tuesday night. Unfortunately, that never really worked out for me, and instead I took the first chance I had, my spring break, to crash a rehearsal and catch up with everybody there. At the same time, I was also always a member of the various children and youth choirs, starting in preschool all the way through high school. Once again, it was another hour that I could let myself forget about any homework due the next day and just let myself have fun singing with my friends. My favorite part of each year was when we would start preparing for the musical. In the Messengers, it was always a fun surprise to find out what we would be doing that year. The highlights being Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, complete with chili dinner served by the cast, Charlie Brown, and my personal favorite, The Beatles Show, in which every song and many of the lines came exclusively from Beatles songs. In addition to being a fun way to spend time with my friends, this group also helped me feel more confident in my performing abilities. Kathy Lively, my choir director for close to 10 years, knew what I was capable of and pushed me to be even better than I thought I could be. She somehow managed to convince me that I could actually pull off a last-minute solo on Christmas Eve when I started learning it 20 minutes before the service started. She taught me how to act like a mother while also singing Golden Slumbers, a song I couldn't even find a recording of when she told me I'd be singing it as a solo. And trust me, I looked. She never stopped believing that I would be able to pull it off, even when sometimes I was a little doubtful, and that kind of support is hard to come by out in the real world. I loved every minute of the time I spent in both of these groups, but the place I think I truly connected to people was at Camp Kobe. I started going to camp at the earliest age possible and never missed a year until I graduated high school. Then, once I was old enough, I returned to elementary camp as a counselor. I loved camp and I wanted to help the kids in my Sunday school classes enjoy it as much as I had. When I had to start working during the summers, it was really hard to no longer go to camp. Also, when we started going to other camp locations, I didn't really know what to expect. This past summer, I had the misfortune of not managing to get a summer job. What this meant was that I would be able to re-experience one of the things I missed most about my church life. I returned to the junior high and senior high camp at Arroyo Grande as a counselor this year and remembered everything I had loved about camp. It was great to see all my former 3rd and 4th grade campers and Sunday school students as youth and watch them make the same connections to each other that I did with my friends as a camper. All of my experiences as a part of this church helped me become who I am today. When I'm away at school, I don't really think to go to church on Sunday morning, but every time I come home for the weekend, I make sure I get here. After being gone for a few weeks, I start to feel like I need to come back and see my church family. I want to come see my friends and touch base with all the people who have been there for me since I was born. This church and my involvement in all these various groups helped me be more outgoing and feel more confident in who I am and my ability to work with children, which is important when you're studying to become a teacher. And I feel blessed to have grown up in such a loving and supportive church family.
As I said at first service, thank you, Mike, for this opportunity. Wow, how do you cover 37 years in 5 minutes? As Ron and I were planning this talk, we were a bit overwhelmed with how many things we have been involved in within the church and how involved the church and its members have been in our life. Mike asked us to talk about our connections to this church, and I might add that this church has even connected us with friends from the churches we grew up in. Donna Everhart, Carol Silver, and Ron all grew up in the same UMYF group in the same church and reconnected here. We hadn't seen them in years. Tim Silver and I grew up in the same church, so we also reconnected here. Carol, Tim, Ron, and I graduated from the same high school as Melissa and Dave. I think we were there a few years earlier. Committees that we have served on in our 37 years here are children's ministries, youth ministries, worship, family ministries, caring ministries, missions, trustees, and nominations. Groups and activities that we've participated in include the sexuality seminars, teaching Sunday school, teaching Vacation Bible School, MYF counselors, and that was something we really enjoyed. Easter work teams, the mission trip to Guatemala. I was counselor and dean at Camp Colby, Sierra Service Project, a summer fun intern and youth director, WIC, Genesis, communion steward, women's retreats, and many camping trips to Yosemite and Zion, and golf outings. Ron is going to talk about the mission trip to Guatemala that he participated in, and I am going to briefly address Caring Ministries and its effect on my spirituality.
Good morning. One of my most memorable spiritual trips was in Guatemala. It's really hard to believe that it occurred 23 years ago. I didn't know what to expect, except we were going to help them build pews and whatever else they needed. We took our own tools, even power tools, as we found out they had portable generators. I thought, wow, okay, this won't be so bad. This could have been enough further than the reality that we encountered. We stayed in a little motel, if you could call it a motel, in a very small town. Each day we drove to an area, then hiked to the church where we were supposed to help them build pews or benches, you might say, because they just sat on the floor until we got there. When I said hike, I mean hike anywhere from 2 to 3 miles, maybe 4 miles, into the jungle. That's why they needed portable generators. There was no electricity, no running water. This was the jungle with a church built in the middle of it. The people were very generous and appreciative that we came and to help them build the pews. This is a very spiritual time that we were able to work together, building something that they dedicated their lives to do and be part of the church. Let me digress a little bit. Marianne and I spent 3 years in Germany, and while we were there, we tried to adopt some of the German customs, such as their holidays, how they celebrated their holidays. But when I was in Guatemala, I learned to appreciate what I had and appreciate what they had. This may sound kind of funny, but what I think I took away from my experience was that you have to appreciate and accept what other cultures have to offer and not try to change them just because it's not the way you believe or what you feel they should have or how they celebrate their spiritual and their religion. Their living areas were no more than adobe homes. The women didn't wear shoes, they were barefoot. Children at an early age worked in fields to help their family. They did not have machinery to help them to help them plant or to harvest their crops. They carried their harvest on the backs to the market. All their energy was towards their family and church. They dedicated their lives to the church and their family. Sunday was devoted to church all day Sunday, not just an hour or two. It was from sunrise to sundown. They used the generators to blast out the sermon to those who could not attend and to spread the word. And you could hear it for at least a mile away. Men and women sat on different sides of the church and not together. In the afternoon, the families would get together around the church, share meals and spiritual stories. They did not feel less important or they did not feel less or unimportant. They felt appreciative for what they had, both for the family and spiritually. This was my most memorable spiritually, just because how the people treated each other and how they treated us. And they accepted us for what they were, and therefore we accepted for what they were, and how they appreciated life from day to day.